Hello, good people. Thank you for joining Squad Car 37 Live. If you're a musician looking to set up a home studio, or if you're thinking about upgrading your studio, I've got an exciting show for you tonight. My guest is a recording engineer, producer, and guitar player from Nashville who's worked with numerous artists whose names you'll definitely recognize. He runs his own professional recording studio and regularly works out of the legendary Blackbird studio. He's the perfect person to ask about setting up a home recording studio, and he's also a gifted chef. Please join me in welcoming my friend Tom, the guitar foodie. Let's pull you up here, Tom.
Pull me up. Pull me up. Hello, hello.
What's happening?
Oh, happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Happy Mother's Day. Thanks for joining tonight. So for those checking us out, tonight is going to be designed to be sort of educational and fun and an opportunity, especially if you're into music recording, to get some tips from a real expert. And whether you're an entry level or more professional, any and all questions are welcome. Tom will be able to answer them. If he can't answer any of them, I'll just make something up and say it very confidently.
Perfect. Exactly.
So right on. So Tom, can you tell us a little bit about your studio and where you were before you started your own professional recording business?
Well, I guess I'll start with more at the beginning. As far as I started playing guitar when I was 5. That was in 1980. So that was kind of in the Van Halen craze. I started because of Kenny Rogers, rest in peace.
Really?
But that's where my journey started. I started writing songs at 6. I played in my first band when I was 14. By the time I was 15, I was in my own original band, writing music. And I grew up, I was born in Minnesota, but I grew up in the middle of Illinois. And there wasn't a place for a band to play that was 15 years old. So due to that, we had to learn how to make our own shows. So I also became a promoter at that point and, went through a series of different productions trying to push an original band in an all-cover band market in the middle of the prairie.
Oh, my gosh. What part of Illinois? Where?
I was a little south of Champaign, Illinois, where the University of Illinois is at. It was in a little town called Mattoon, Illinois. Don't call it Mattoon. It's Mattoon.
Awesome. Oh, cool. So at an early age, not only were you introduced to music and playing, but you kind of were introduced to the music business.
Yeah. I definitely entered the school of hard knocks immediately. As soon as we started booking, trying to get shows, we were told no 1,000 times before we were told yes. And that's what led us into, creating our own venues of sorts. We would play arcades, very Stranger Things of us. We would play almost any party that would have us. So we played biker parties to, high school parties that were definitely not allowed to be going on.
So you were playing for the Hells Angels when you were 15 years old. That's pretty awesome.
Not quite the Hells Angels, but, not too far off.
Cool.
And, the bass player in the band, father was in the club. And, man, we had a really good time. They loved music. So we were at home. And even though we were playing mainly originals, and most of us were in high school or barely out of high school, they really gave us a good support group. And which ended up helping us to be able to play bars with an original band. We'd play 1 or 2 covers in a 3.5, 4-hour set, which, that doesn't really happen at bars anymore, except for in Nashville.
Yeah, right. So how did you what got you interested in, there's playing, there's learning an instrument, there's playing out, and then there's the sort of mystery, the cool factor, the whole other world of recording. How did you get interested in the recording side of things?
Well, we started recording, early, being an original band, writing our own music. I had a 4-track. I started playing that way. It immediately could not give me the quality that I was getting off the CDs that I was buying. And I knew that right away, so I started chasing how do I sound like that? How do I get my guitar to sound like that? And how do I get on a CD? As easy as, and even as 10 years ago as it sounds now to talk about CDs, in 1987, if you were a band that had a CD out, like, you made it, like that was not, there was no disc makers, you couldn't just have 100 made or 300 made. Actually, our first batch of CDs we had printed by Sony out of Vincennes, Indiana, which was the headquarters to the whole, 10 CDs for a penny.
Wow.
You remember those days? Yeah, that's where they printed all those CDs at. And, we had to network ourselves to figure out a way that we could get in. The minimal run we could do was 1,000 CDs. So that's what we shot for.
So back then, were you recording and mixing and sort of engineering your own music? How did that work?
No, we worked our way up until when we got to the CD level, we were working with a guy named Jonathan Pines out of Champaign, Illinois. He's a Grammy nominated engineer for his work with Wilco. He's done a bunch of good stuff. He's got great ears. Just inherently, I started learning as he was doing stuff. And, at the same time of learning, I started being like, well, I might have done that a little different, or maybe I would have done it this way. And it was definitely a trial and error and kind of learning process, a learning curve as we went through. But that was the first time I was able to have indirectly my hands on professional gear. He had an Amic console, which was like a little baby to an API or a Neve, so to speak. And he had all the outboard gear that I'm still in love with today, as well as some really good microphones. And also Mark Rubel, who was one of the guys who he got his job for the Blackbird Academy. And then I moved and went to the Blackbird Academy about 6 months in Nashville. So that's indirectly where my Blackbird fascination started.
That's interesting. And so for those of you who are not familiar with Blackbird Academy and Blackbird Studios, those tuning in, do you want to give sort of a little bit of background about that sort of legendary recording space?
Well, it's owned by John McBride and Martina McBride. Anything you've heard in the last almost 20 years by Martina has definitely been cut by John there. Kings of Leon did their debut album. That was what lifted them up. They also just recorded their last album there.
So Your Sex is on Fire. Is that the track?
Yeah. I record out of that room a lot. And when I hear that song, I hear that room. That's how crazy it is. Like,
oh, wow.
And I start seeing microphones. Like, I know which mics they used on the snares and which guitar amps that Shakir King used on things. And that's the biggest context that changed once I got to Nashville, is these things that I'd heard for years. I was getting the lowdown from a lot of the guys that had done some of my favorite albums. And, that's the thing with lots of killer engineers, is they're not shy about telling you how they did it. It's not a secret. They don't hold on to it like it's their way or no way. And as many times as I've seen, people like Ben Fowler and Vance Powell do something in the studio, when I try to mimic it, it's not the same thing. There's the whole gain structure that's going on. They're manipulating from mic placement all the way to how it goes down ADA, to the computer. And there's so many factors. So just because you see their settings on one thing doesn't give you the other 50 settings you need.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about my fascination for sound and recording, and it was going back to listening to like early Metallica and hearing those guitar sounds, and then going to the guitar shop and trying to find an amp that would give me that same sound.
I did that chase as well.
And there wasn't one. I mean, you'd get this same amp. You'd get like a Mesa Boogie or whatever, and it was almost there, but it didn't have the punch. It didn't have and what I realized was there's only so much that an amp does. It is so much happens in the studio, in the production, in the way things are organized,
Oh,
the
yeah.
frequencies are put together. So I was in a losing battle, but it led me to wanting to figure out, and doubled guitars and panning and all these different things. And I recall
I'm trying to find
another
him. I'm friends with the guy. I know his name's Michael. But
album that really got my attention was. Who's that?
I was just trying to go through my friend list because the guy who recorded a lot of my favorite stuff out of the 80s and 90s, lives in Nashville. And the first time I ran into him was at a bar, and it was kind of like a rock and roll night. And there was members of Skid Row there. I saw Lita Form randomly just get up on stage and perform there. Like, you never knew who was really going to show up. And I just started talking to him, kind of had crazy hair, and we just kind of started shooting the poop. And he told me he was an engineer, and ended up he was the guy who engineered And Justice for All.
Oh, wow.
As well as
a very
Ozzy's No More Tears.
Great album.
Yeah,
so great album.
Some of the stories he told me just that night, I was just like, man.
Well, I would love to hear the stories about And Justice for All in particular, because, Google it, anybody who hasn't looked into And Justice for All and the bass in And Justice for All, or is there a bass in Justice for All? Was there a falling out with the band? Was there not? Was it just a new sound they were going for? Whatever it was, that album has a totally unique sound to it. And, what was their later album where Lars changed up his snare and had a totally unique sound on that too?
I forgot already.
Saint Anger, I think. Yeah, Saint Anger. And then Death Magnetic, where they decided they were going to win the, compression wars, or win the loudness wars, and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, the point is that the other album that got my attention early on in the 90s was Nine Inch Nails' Downward Spiral. And this what got me interested into production, because I would listen to it over and over and over again in headphones to try to figure out what I was hearing. There were so many film sounds. There were so many just things that were just beautifully fit together. And deconstructing that was kind of trying to find the recipe, so to speak, was something of interest. So, all right, so you made it from, you started early on. You've developed a band. You're basically you're playing out. You're going into the recording studio, and now you've moved to Nashville, the music capital. You're in one of the top studios in the world, learning from some of the best. And then what happens?
Well, I interned out of Blackbird for 6 months, and I did a tremendous amount of learning with that. I had a little bit more of an age or wisdom with me than some of the kids that were in their 20s. I was in my upper 30s at that point, and I really tried to soak up every aspect of a commercial studio. I'm not sure if there's a better place on earth I could have done it. Maybe Abbey Road. But Blackbird has so many award-winning and just some of the best engineers and producers on the planet coming through it daily, that it was really awesome to be able to see their setups, to see how they worked with people, the structure of the day, every little detail, just being a fly on the wall. I was lucky enough to be interning at Blackbird while Chris Stapleton mixed Traveler, so I don't know how much you would pay for that experience, even though I was working for free. Wow. I literally got to watch parts of that album mixed. And Chris Stapleton was relatively unknown at that point. I mean, he was known in certain circles with the Steel Drivers stuff, but not near the notoriety of now. I remember when I was kind of telling people, friends back home about it, everyone was like, who? Huh? And then once it got released and he played, CMT a couple times and the CMA stuff, then everybody knew his name.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And the talent that goes through that studio, and the people and the names and the opportunities of being that close and working on stuff together with those sort of artist superpowers must have been pretty amazing.
It was awesome. Yeah. And I mean, there was a bunch of sessions that, just even though I was basically just bringing in food for them and, running to get whatever they may need. But, we would carry in gear when, Dave Cobb needed or Vance Powell needed something. And just being able to see the setup of how they were going through the mix process was amazing. And Dave Cobb is, I wouldn't say necessarily secretive, but he tries to keep it very private. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I learned quickly with Nashville and producers is a lot of them, everyone's got technical knowledge here. Everybody. I mean, you have 20-year-olds that come in knowing Pro Tools amazingly well. And, everyone has the talent here. So what separates people, the way John McBride puts it is, you got to be a cool hang. You have to be a good hang. But there's some producers that they just set the tone of the room with attitude and how they take care of each person, each musician in there individually. And it really sets it up for success, and Dave Cobb, I noticed that quickly with him is that he was very chipper, not argumentative, wanted to work through it. There was never a roadblock for him. He could just go right through it. And Vance Powell is very much the same way. Those guys have so much experience that, typical bumps in the road are smoothed out before they get there.
Vance Powell's pretty awesome engineer. And, it's interesting that some people might not recognize these names, but they definitely recognize the work, right? So Vance Powell, give me some examples of some of his all-star.
The White Stripes, Amos Lee, everything you've heard Chris Stapleton in the last 5 years. It's a long list. Vance works with everyone, and a lot of his more unknown bands are the ones that I freak out when I hear, where I'm just like, man, because he does the same thing for everyone. He makes everyone sound, the best they can possibly sound. He's great at inspiring too. He's a killer producer himself. He's just the guy when you have in the room, everything sounds better, and at the end of the day, everything sounds better. So, it's a win-win-win. He's also, one of the pricier guys and, has a whole management team that does all of his booking for him. But proof's in the pudding, he's one of the best.
What's his studio? Sputnik?
Sputnik, yeah. Which is just down the road from Blackbird. He comes in, the first time I met him, he came in to talk to the Academy, I think like the third or fourth day that I was there. I made him chocolate chip jalapeno cornbread, and which I made for the class. It wasn't that I made it just for him, but then I ended up we walked over to his studio. It was before he had built his new Sputnik, but we walked over there, and I had this bag of cornbread, and I was just like, "Hey man, if you want a piece of jalapeno chocolate chip cornbread, I got some." He just looked at me like, "What?" He's like, "Is there anything I need to know about this cornbread?" I'm like, "No, it's good." He's like, "How good?" And I'm like, "It's good. If you like jalapenos and chocolate, it's surprising how good it is in cornbread." And he ate a big chunk of it and agreed that it was good. And I've cooked for him a handful of times over the years for different things too. And he's really fun to work with on any level, but he's a blast to cook with because, he's a fellow foodie. So he appreciates every bite.
That's awesome. Well, I want to get into the foodie side of things, and I'd like to hear how you made the connection. Obviously there's an example. So it sounds like, especially, well, since let's get to the next part of the story, and then let's circle back to some of the components that you would recommend that people need to get for their home studio or consider. So after Blackbird, then you decided to transition.
Yeah. I started doing mainly producing, a little bit of engineering, but mainly producing and engineering stuff out of Blackbird. I've done a handful of things out of Sound Emporium too, and a couple other studios in Nashville. But I was so used to Blackbird, and the mic collection is pretty much second to none. Some of the rooms are definitely my favorite rooms to work out of. I have a good working repertoire with them, so it was kind of a no-brainer to be like, who wants to record at Blackbird? Let me record you. And I've done that for about 5 years, ranging from anyone with, like Tiffany did part of her last album, or I guess at this point, the album before last. She's pumping out stuff there.
And by the way, guys, that's Tiffany. Yes. Yeah.
I get a kick out of it. I love Tiffany though. She's great. And she's a fellow foodie. So one of my traditions in the studio is that I'm cooking. If we're in there for the day, I'm probably going to make lunch and dinner. And there's so many things that covers, because you get one guy or gal hungry in the middle of the process and they bring out this huge pamphlet of, places you can call and have the interns pick it up at. And one person wants from this Italian place, the next person wants a salad, next person wants a grilled cheese, next person wants to go find a food truck. It turns into this process, and you're paying really good money for the producers, engineers, and the day at Blackbird. So I just like to head them off at the pass and ask them if they have any food allergies, if they have any favorite foods, and then go from there.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant because food the other way could be a total distraction to the creative process.
Entirely. And that's the thing is, like, when the food is already there and you already know it's going to be good, like I know it's going to be good, it sets the comfort level. It makes it cozy. All of a sudden they can worry about recording and not worrying about when are they going to eat? When's it going to be here? Why is it late? Why is this not the way I ordered it? And I, tacos and a couple different barbecues, and I have a breakfast plates from vegan to vegetarian to fat kid biscuits and gravy that I can just cover the gamut with. And I even have a vegan biscuits and gravy I can do actually with soy sage and almond milk. So it's pretty much whatever I want it to be the best food it can be for them. Like I cook for their palate, not for mine. And that also creates a bond with me producing wise for them, where they're like, oh, this guy, he's trying to help, and it's good to have that feeling when you're in a studio that can be very confusing. It can be something that's almost scary for people, especially, with a lot of independent artists where it's their dime or it's their loan. And they don't know how, the money is flying out the door so fast. You want to really be able to maximize what you do. Mm-hmm.
So, Tom, you've gone the next step and actually not only, first of all, everyone should check you out online at guitarfoodie.com. Mm-hmm. Let me pull this up real quick. Guitarfoodie.com, and on Instagram, guitar_foodie. And you put together some super cool on social, like little videos and walkthroughs of all kinds of like just great. You're starving. You want to get something quick and delicious food.
Yeah. Tortillas is one of my favorite things. It's just using a tortilla and setting the oven to about 370. And the first time I made one, I didn't invent these by any means, but the first time I made one, just out of having a pile of tortillas left over, I just put a little bit of Caesar dressing on it and just sprinkled some mozzarella and baked it. And I couldn't believe how crispy it was and how much flavor it had and just how good it was. And, I had a stroke about 2.5 years ago, and I've lost almost 80 pounds since then. And I've changed my eating profusely, where I really watch my salt intake and try to take care of my blood pressure as good as I can through food, which I've been able to do. I still take some medicines, but I can pretty much control my blood pressure entirely through my food intake. Wow. So that's one of my angles every time. But, when I can have something that makes me feel like pizza and it doesn't have the sodium and a lot of the health risks associated with like not a mom and pop place, but, a over commercial that you could buy in all 50 states kind of pizza, those, if I have one piece of certain brands, my blood pressure shoots up 50 points, one piece. Wow. So where I can eat a pile of my own tortillas and it won't go up at all.
So you've written a book. You have your own recipe book, right?
I do.
Oh, cool. Can you hold that up to the awesome. And so people can go to your website to check out and purchase your book, right?
Yep. Yeah, I have more on the way too. I have a couple written. My next one's just brunch. This one doesn't have any breakfast in. This one, I don't call it a health cookbook, but there's a lot of healthy variations. I wrote it right after my stroke and basically through my journey of what I was eating to lose weight. But there's some, I have a Nashville hot chicken, but instead of it being fried, it's baked, and it's more of a shake and bake style that's in here. It's wonderful, but I can use that same version, and I write most of these recipes open-ended, so it gives you quite a few options. But I can do that same recipe with cauliflower and make like a buffalo chicken minus the chicken,
Gotcha.
cauliflower baked, and it works wonderfully.
So from time to time, I'm sure you get artists that are vegan or vegetarian and as well. And
at least half the time, at least half.
No kidding. Half.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's very cool. Well, that is fantastic. Let's circle back. I'd love to ask you, get your opinion. You know, I've got a home set up and I'm constantly being asked, what do I need? My son or daughter wants to get into recording. We've got a limited budget. We don't even know where to start. So if a person's planning to start a home recording studio, from your perspective, what are the most important sort of fundamental elements that they need?
Well, you're going to need to get something that, you know, is microphone based. You can get little MIDI keyboards. See if I got one of mine hanging out close up. No. You know, but you'll need a cheaper microphone to get the ball rolling. You'll need an interface that's going to your computer, PC or Mac, whatever you got. There's, you know, the price war on those, you know, you can get some for around $300. That'll do the job. Will it be professional quality? Not quite. You know, a lot of the conundrums when I talk to people about budgets, my joke would always be, you know, about 2 or 3 years ago, someone would say, we have $15,000 to spend. And the next time I talk to them, they'd be like, oh, we have $10,000 to spend. And then the next time I talk to them, they'd be like, we got about 7,000. And the next time they'd be like, yeah, we got $3,000.
Oh, wow.
And it always becomes a question of, I mean, could we record part of it ourselves? Like, that's a very natural question to come once you decide that you want something recorded. And I mean, it's tough for me to say that, no, you shouldn't record it yourself, because I think it's a learning curve that's good for people to understand what engineers actually do. But at the same time, if you want pro quality, and that's what you want out of this project, pay someone, you know, and it's not the end of the world. You know, there's a couple times this year already, we've recorded whole EPs in 3 days. 3 days.
Wow.
So it doesn't have to be the expensive thing ever, you know, but it will cost you money, you know, and you're paying for the experience. You know, if someone's giving you a great deal, chances are they're running to Guitar Center and buying a bunch of stuff with the money you gave them, and you're their guinea pig.
Mm-hmm.
But like I was saying, you can get a cheaper interface for $300 to $500. PreSonus, Focusrite have a couple of variations within that. The middle of the road, which I like a lot, actually, is like the Universal Audio. The Blackbird Academy had Apollos at every student's desk, and that was my first interaction with them. And I mean, the UAD plugins are some of the best, and I'm a hardware guy. You know, I like real amps. I like real hardware. I like real microphones. You know, I've been playing more with modeling microphones in the last 6 months, and we're definitely heading in the right direction with a lot of the modeling things. But
like the slate modeling stuff or something else?
Townsend. We've been using a lot of the Townsend. We actually just had a shootout with the Slate about a week ago.
Interesting.
The Townsend, man, really does it. The Slate's pretty good too, but the Townsend, for modeling, you know, we compared it with a vintage 87 2 days ago, and the vintage 87 setting that they have, and they're definitely not the same thing. You know, a lot of the texture that you lose is like the lower mids, the beefiness sound, which you're really going to miss out of a female and male vocal, compared to, you know, if you have a chance to use a real vintage mic versus using a modeling mic, it's a no-brainer. Like, use the real vintage one, you know.
Gotcha.
But the bang for the buck with the Townsend is you get about 40 microphones for the price of one, and it's close. I mean, it's kind of EQ curves that they're doing to make up for things, but and they are, we still use it, and, you know, on finished product. It's not that we don't ever use them. It's just that, especially with vocals and certain guitar tones and certain drum tones, I have go-to microphones, and, you know, they're not cheap. You know, that's just part of the game, but they do exactly what I want, and I know what they'll do every time. I don't have to wonder if it's going to work.
Right. Well, let me circle back here to audio interfaces. So you're going to need a computer, right? You're going to need, and if you need to be mobile, well, first of all, let me circle back. What you said at the beginning, yes, if you need to record stuff and you're wondering if you should invest in a recording studio or recruit an expert, go with an expert. Get a producer, get a recording engineer. Invest your money into that and focus on building your craft, right? Working on music, creating the music.
And I mean, a lot of artists that once they've worked in the studio with a good engineer will end up buying stuff because they've learned along the way. I'm a prime example of that, you know? So, I mean, especially if it's your first project and you're just literally flying out of the gates with it, man, don't be scared to pay someone and learn what they've probably put decades into learning, you know?
That's a really good point. Not only you can use that opportunity not only to get an in product, but to use it as a little bit of informal direct education, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I have almost every single client I have ask questions and I give answers. You know, that's just part of the process.
So let's go back to audio interfaces. Once you have a computer, two things on the computer side of things. If you want to be mobile, if you want to be able to record and do stuff anywhere, a laptop, if you can get a powerful one, is a good choice. That's what I've gone with. I've got a MacBook Pro here. And if you're going to be set in a specific space, if the space is most important to you, then that's not as important. You know, desktop is fine. But
Exactly.
I found that if you need to be mobile, laptop is a good alternative as a computer. And just a general note is try to get as much horsepower as you can afford out of your computer, because that's going to drive all of the software and do the heavy lifting of the stuff that you're going to be integrating into it. So as far as you had mentioned a couple things, you know, PreSonus. I'm on the website of a local music center here in Northern Virginia, Chuck Levin's. They're awesome. They've been around forever. I bought a ton of stuff from them. They have great pricing and really talented folks, salespeople. Anyway, on this end, at this point, it depends on budget and it depends on how many things you want to record simultaneously, right? So if it's just you and me and my guitar, I've got, as you described, a couple interfaces, but the one I use most often is the Apollo Twin. It's pricey, but it's got really, really good sound quality. Would you agree with that, Tom? The conversion is really high.
Yeah, it's a good mid-level sound quality. You're not going all the way, but you're getting there. You're over the halfway point, and it's the main thing with UAD is you get all their plugins or access to them. You know. Depending on how you go about it, but and they're awesome. You know, there's some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah, UAD has great plugins, and this device that we're talking about here actually powers the plugin. So you have this plugged into your computer, and you're able to access those plugins. That can actually be a bit of a downside if you like to travel and take your plugins with you, and you don't want to have this, but you just want to still be able to do stuff with your computer. But you know, there are other plugins for that stuff. Now, another less expensive entry level, and that has two interfaces, so you can record two things simultaneously: a guitar or a bass, or guitar and bass, or a vocal and a guitar input. So it's a mic input, two mic inputs, or they can be two line inputs, right? Mm-hmm. So same thing here is a Focusrite Scarlett. So this is $229 compared to about $800 on the new Twin. And it's a good entry level. A lot of people I'm hearing use this. I've got other Focusrite stuff. And then if you pay a little bit more, they've got a Focusrite 4 input over here for $399, $400. And the Universal Audio also has a new 4 input as well. I'm not sure if it's on this screen, but you could check that out. Apogee, if you're using Mac stuff, Apogee, what do you think of their interface?
That's what we have here at my studio.
Yeah.
And that's you know, the final product especially matters so much on what your interface is. And it's just one of those things, you know, like most of the interfaces at Blackbird are tens, if not $100,000. and you get what you pay for. The clarity, you can tell a difference, especially when you're monitoring on some good monitors. And that finished product will be up a couple of notches,
So this particular Apogee is a 4 interface, which is nice. They're kind of going to that mid ground. It used to be 2, and it used to be 8, and then you stack 8s to 16. But
Yep.
this 4 is kind of a nice balance. And like I said, the Apollo also comes with a 4-channel as well, which is not on here. So 4 is also a nice mid ground. You were saying when we were chatting the other day about drums, and drums are probably one of those instruments that is going to easily and quickly use up a lot of microphone inputs, and they all have to be going at the same time because you've got a kick, a snare, a crash, and all these. I take that back. They don't have to be going at the same time. For example, I think Foo Fighters, I think Taylor will do like the cymbals and in one room, and then you got Grohl doing some of the other stuff. You break it up, etc. But in most of the cases, you're playing all of those things, and so you need to have microphones live at the same time. So a 4-channel, you just kind of divide and conquer. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the more it always comes down to when you're going through it, how many things can you record at once? My favorite way to record is everybody playing live. So if you want to mic up a drum kit, have a singer, have a bass player, have multiple guitar players and a keyboard player playing at once, you're probably going to need like 24, 32, 48 inputs, depending on how hard you want to make the Rubik's Cube. That's just part of the equation. I'm a little bit more of a less is more on drums, so my typical drum setup is about 10 microphones. But I've done some that have been as many as 35 or 40 mics on just a drum set, which is you end up with a bunch of phase issues, and you'll have to really pick mics that you'll not use and versus the ones you'll use. But I have it down pretty well within my 10-ish limit, and it works pretty good. And I usually throw a couple trash mics and like just to see what happens, throw a little experimentation in every time too. And I have found some of my favorite ways to get certain tones that way too. So it's always an experiment.
So some of the larger ones you can get 8, like the Apollo's got an 8 interface. It's about $2,000. And again, in the Apollo, if you started with the duet or the 4, you can combine them, you can stack them. So it kind of gives you additional inputs. I'm kind of privy to the universal audio. That's what I use.
See, the good thing when you have at least 2 inputs is you do have a stereo capability. So you could record drum set just in a room and have a left right, and then that would be your whole, drum track would just be a left right of the drums. That's one way you could do it. But you couldn't record the drums, the vocals, and everything at once. But if you started off with an acoustic guitar and a vocal, you got your scratch track, and then you re-recorded the guitar over that, re-recorded your vocal, added a bass. You could do all that with just 2 inputs. Add a keyboard in stereo, because I like them in stereo, and then record the drums in stereo, and you could record a whole band, not necessarily ideally, but it could happen with just 2 inputs.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So even if you're starting out and you don't have a big budget, dual input interface is a way to go. Okay, so let's talk. I have a feeling you're going to love talking microphones. Let's talk microphones.
Yes, microphones. That's definitely one of the things with being at Blackbird, where every microphone I had read about, all of a sudden I could play with, and then many others that I'd never heard about ever. And I quickly, started narrowing down favorites. I see kind of the standards you're pulling up there.
What if you could only afford one microphone?
SM7,
which is what we're using. Yep. What I'm using right here. Let's see if I can find an SM7.
Yeah, I have a stereo pair here that we use a lot. I love SM7 on guitar. I like it on some vocals. I've used it for kick in, kick out, snare drum, room mic. I mean, I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't try an SM7 on. There's a workhorse in those, especially for the $400-ish price tag. You can get a long way with those.
And As I recall, Michael Jackson used this on Thriller. I think Guns N' Roses used it on a lot of their vocals on their first big album.
Yep.
I mean, it's nothing to $400, but
yeah, you've heard them before, and they're virtually part of every podcast. All puns intended.
Yeah,
yeah. That's why I had to buy two, because when we started recording podcasts here, you know, we'll probably need to buy another two, because everybody wants, like, can we have 4 mics? It just became a no-brainer. That's just like what the standard for podcasts are. It's all because of Joe Rogan.
Yeah. And so this is what they call a dynamic microphone, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And this particular microphone, when you get an interface like the Scarlett or the Universal Audio, and you plug this mic in and go for it, you gotta crank the gain on it, unless you get something like one of these guys, right? Like a cloud interface.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what that, you know, I've used cloud. I like them. I don't mind them. But if you got the right preamp combination with the right compression, you can get there with any microphone. Ribbons are actually the trickiest to use in a preamp situation, because they're a different ohmage. Little trickier, but even that, you know, there's certain preamps that are made specifically for ribbons. I like those. That's usually what I use at Blackbird. They got some vintage RCA preamps that are great on ribbons, that were made for the RCA ribbons of the 40s and 50s. And they work perfectly together because the ohms line up. And I like, that's one thing, you know, before Nashville, before I got here, ribbon mics, I was just like, oh, if I wanted to sound vintage. But man, actually a lot of things you hear on modern stuff has some ribbon appeal. It's just how that the ribbon soaks up the sound. You know, dynamics, you get more of a proximity effect on things, but condensers are actually, you know, rounding up. So the quietest thing that it can hear, it's making just as loud as the loudest thing it can hear. You know, so there's certain times where, like, I'm not a fan of condensers on cymbals. I've used them from time to time. I'll use C12s and M49s, M50s. You know, I don't ever kick those out. But in general, unless it's a really, really high-end condenser, I don't like what it does to cymbals. It catches part of the splash, especially if the drummer is a hard cymbal hitter. It creates issues for me when I get to the mix, where I've been using more of a Glenn Johns approach. I might be getting too technical, but more of a Glenn Johns approach with a top side ribbon mic, and I love the way it captures a drum set.
So give me an example of, let me pull up a ribbon mic that you would use in that scenario. Give me a name of something and I'll pull it up.
There's actually these ribbon mics that get made in Nashville are called Stagger. And I got one that I've been loving. I've had it for about 6 months. And it's yet again kind of turning into that mic that it's like, well, let's just throw it on that and see how it goes. And sometimes it fits perfectly, you know. Sometimes it's not quite, you know, guitar tones, it's a little bit, you know, ribbons inherently are a little more dark than a dynamic or a condenser. Yeah, there they are.
Oh, cool. So in that scenario, when you're using, did you say 5 mics total for the drums?
Yeah, we could do it in 5. That wouldn't be my ideal. Ideally, I'd want a kick in, you know, for bass drum, and a kick out, a snare top and bottom. Tom wise, depending on how the drummer hits stuff, if they're really pronounced with how they hit it and they have good articulation, I'll just use the ribbon overheads and I'll probably be able to catch it. If it's like more of a metal or a rock thing, I might put 421s on the toms. But I'd probably only do that a handful of times a year. And then I do mid rooms. I like using Coles for mid rooms. And then I do far rooms, which when I'm at Blackbird, I usually use the M50s. Toby Wright taught me some tricks too with some Audio Technicas for some far room miking. Gets into the physics with those, you know. just being the exact distance and in a tuned room. That's part of the thing too. All the rooms in a commercial studio are made for recording, so there's not as many resonant frequencies at all. Where if you're just recording in someone's garage or something like that, you're going to have a lot of things to fight.
Right.
Same thing with when someone's wanting to make a studio at their house, especially if they're going to record drums. It's like your room is going to be about half of your drum sound. So if you're recording in a small room and you want a small room drum sound, you got it. But if you're wanting like a stadium or a hall sound, you don't have it. And it'll be really tough to fake with like some sort of reverb plug-in.
Because you've already got the room ambience baked into the original
Exactly.
sound. It's not dry in the sense to where you can add it and it'll blend well.
Yeah. And before I got into Music City, I thought that, a dead room would give you more control in post-production. Now I don't like a dead room. I want there to be a little bit of life in certain rooms, like one of our live rooms here. It's so good for just acoustic and vocals. It's where I do most of my podcasts for Guitar Foodie. And the first time I did it and just recorded with a cell phone, immediately when I played it on my mastering setup upstairs, I was like, wow, that's a cell phone? And why it sounded good, it wasn't because the cell phone was awesome. It's because the room was awesome.
Oh, that's an interesting point. It's and that's why you go to one of the many reasons why you go to a studio like yours or a studio like Blackbird that has a room that has $1 million sound to it.
Yeah, and they do. Many of the rooms at Blackbird are multi-million-dollar rooms. And I mean, that's the problem of when I was doing so much there. It's so addicting, because like you get drum sounds in Studio D or Studio A. Like, there's not many other places that you're going to get that drum sound. You get spoiled very quickly.
So if someone was decided that they wanted to invest in a condenser microphone, an entry-level condenser microphone, what would you recommend?
Audio Technica is great bang for the buck. There's a couple of the Neumanns that are a little less expensive that are still great too. I mean, with microphones, you really get what you pay for. There's not much of a collector curve on them. Like the mics that are considered like the collector microphones are used by top-notch studios, and that's because they sound good. Collector guitars might end up on somebody's wall and rarely getting played, but a collector microphone is probably being used a lot.
Yeah, I've got a Neumann.
And those,
yep, go ahead.
I mean, those being like, the classic U47, the Telefunken U47, the Neumann U47, the U87, the U67. The 87 does not have a tube, and then the 67 has a tube, and the 47 have a tube, so that imparts a different kind of sound. With big, male vocals, I love 47s. I love good vintage 47s. There's a lot of brands on the market that are trying to copy the Neumann U47, and there's some great ones. They're getting better and better at it, but I'm still addicted to the vintage ones. I have a lot of vintage addictions.
Well, if you have access to them, man, use them. So I just pulled up an Audio Technica AT4040. So this is a $300 studio condenser microphone.
And I have a pair of those here, and I love them.
Yeah,
they're great go-tos.
Yeah.
For certain things. They're good, really good on acoustic guitars. I have other mics I could pick from, and I'll still use those on acoustic, depending on how the acoustic sounds. They're really good for that.
So I guess the answer to the question, if the question is, I'm just starting to do some recording at home and I need a microphone, what kind of microphone? The first question is going to be, what are you going to record? Is it your voice?
Yeah.
Is it a ukulele? Is it an acoustic guitar? Is it an acoustic guitar and your voice too? So in this situation with an Audio Technica condenser microphone, $300, you could record your guitar with this, an acoustic guitar. You can record your voice as well.
Yes.
You could
same with the SM7, like we were talking about. It's and that's what you should try for. If you only get to buy one mic, try to get one that has multiple uses. Well, like an SM7. or the Audio Technica.
Mhm.
You know, and I think there's one even under the 40 that it's a 2020, something like that. That's also pretty darn good, you know, for bang for the buck.
Mhm.
Like I said, it's the nature. If you're wondering like why that mic costs $4,000, there's a really good reason.
Which one's this?
Well, anyway, you know, if you go buy a brand new U87, I think it's like 35 or
Yeah.
3,700.
Okay.
You buy a new Neumann U67, which I've used a bunch of the brand new ones. They sound incredible. And there's even sometimes where I've been using the brand new U67s over the vintage ones, because the vintage ones, you know, like lots of vintage things, will start to have moments and, you know, won't be full functioning always. And at Blackbird, there's some great techs that take care of the problems fast. There's also a huge mic selection. So if one goes down, there's another one to grab.
Replacement.
Always.
Yeah.
But I was working on a project in January with a good buddy of mine, Sean, and he was just like, let's just set up all new U67s for the stuff for it. We had 67s. And I had one thought where I was like, but I want to use the vintage ones. And then I was like, because Sean's insane. Like if you saw his list of credits, it's insane. But I was like, nope, Sean knows. I'm totally gonna go with that. And within about 10 minutes of pulling the mics up, I was like, well, yeah, those sound great. But you know, they're more around $7,000.
Oh man. So it depends on your level, depends on your budget, and it depends on your attention to detail as far as the quality of the audio. While we were chatting, I just noticed that we got some pings on the comments. Winter Willie, I'm gonna say hello back to you. We got a message, hi Uncle Jason. So I definitely need to throw a shout out to the fam there. And headphones, we're going to need to monitor what we've recorded. And there's couple ways to do this. One is what's called near field monitors, right? So some monitors in your room, like you and headphones. So talking headphones, I pulled up a model that I'm actually wearing now, and I think that you had mentioned that you like also as kind of a less expensive but a good quality headphone.
Yeah, my actual go-tos are the M50s, and not with the X. That X, I'm pretty sure, means that there's a bass boost, and I try to keep it as flat as possible. But the M50s that I use now, I've had since 2003. So
you're right.
17 years, and I'm addicted to them.
That's it. You're right. Now, what you said there, this is really important for mixing, right? So when you're getting into this sort of thing, you actually want headphones that do what?
Well, you want them to be very flat response. If they have an added bass to them or an added treble, then you're going to artificially hear that, and it won't necessarily be there on your final product. You know, it'll be there because of how you're listening to it. That's why, you know, back in the day, there used to always be the car check, you know, where you'd get done with the mix and you'd burn a CD and you'd go check it in the car. And it's not that the car had better speakers in the studio. It usually did not. But that's where most people at that point were going to be hearing music. You know, now, usually at the end of the day, or it's usually the next day, once my ears are rested a bit, I'll listen to the mix on a laptop or a phone, because that's where most people listen to music these days.
Yeah, and I'll even add that I'll throw in earbuds. I'll listen to it in the earbuds and then sleep on it. And then what happens? The next day, you get up first thing and you listen to it then, because sometimes there's some crazy gremlins that get in there and they give you some magic at 3:00 in the morning, and you think your mix is the great. At least I'll speak for myself.
Oh yeah,
this is the greatest freaking thing you have ever heard in your life. And then the next morning, you put your headphones on, head down to the studio, and you were gravely mistaken.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to that reference point, you know, and the longer that you can keep the same thing as the reference, the more your ears are going to be used to the room, to the monitors. And when you're really trying to get the final product out the door with consistency, you have to have the reference. Like there's not really a choice. You have to have a reference.
So being familiar with your headphones or your speakers, whatever you choose, know what they sound like. Listen to songs that you know very well on them so that you know how they react to those songs. And then you're able to mix those, mix properly when you're using, using those as a reference. And again, stay away from, when you're choosing headphones that are more leisure listening headphones that artificially boost bass. Beats, for example, I've got a pair of Beats. They sound fantastic, but you don't want to, if you mix with them, because they boost the bass, you're going to reduce the bass in your mix, and then you're going to get into your car or somewhere else, and you're not going to hear any bass.
Pretty good.
That's it. All right. Do you want to cover some near field monitors that that we might be able to find on Chuck Levin's?
Well, like we talked about a little bit yesterday, my favorite ones are the NS10s, which they're not really making anymore. There's a couple variations.
The Yamaha.
And they're just honest. They're just what you hear is what you get. And especially at Blackbird, I'm always going between the ATCs, which are pretty pricey monitors, and the NS10s. And at the end of the day, of a long day, there'll be a little more NS10s because you almost get used to the thunder of the ATCs. Which ones are those?
That's Abaton. These are not.
Those are trying to be NS10s. Crisp Chordology, which those are pretty good. I've heard them at other friends of mine's places, and I like them. It's just the old NS10s are so awesome.
It's interesting you look for NS10s because they don't make them anymore. You have to find them on reverb.com or somewhere else, but they're in every studio. They look similar to this, but they've kind of reissued. Yamaha has reissued similar looking speakers, but they're not what you're talking about. And I've heard actually good things about these, but the NS10s, just like the monitors, the headphones you're talking about, are designed to be very flat and honest.
They're very honest. I mean, we could go through a long list of albums that have been recorded, mixed, and mastered on NS10s. Especially a lot of things of your favorites from the 80s and 90s. Some of my favorite albums from the 90s, the whole process was done on NS10s. That's when I kind of really, once I found that, I really started like listening hard on those, where I was like, wait, like they did what on these? Like one of my favorite Alice in Chains albums, Jar of Flies, was recorded, mixed, and mastered by Toby Wright on NS10s. And Toby's done Korn albums and Kiss albums, and he's got a great ear, and he was swearing up and down on how good they were. So I just kept on jumping in, a little deeper, and listening to them, and they're just honest. That's the thing, is you don't want to, if you add bass, you want that to translate to what you're going to hear it to, like in a car or in your headphones at home or your friend's, Bluetooth system. You're gonna check it on when people get done with an album, they check it on everything they have at their disposal, which I think is great. Because we really only have a short amount of time before mastering to make corrections. So that's one of the first things I tell the artists is like, listen to this on everything.
The goal being to get a nice, average, good sound on all of those different pieces, including,
and then just like many classic albums, what Pink Floyd was monitoring and people were listening to Dark Side of the Moon in 1972 is not what people listen to Dark Side of the Moon on today. So there's a translation that's going to have to go even decades into the future of where professional audio and home audio will be going.
Just even on the speakers on it's got to sound good just on your phone.
Yep.
That's great. Hey, Tom, I so appreciate, this was so fun. This time has just flown by.
Well, we could talk forever about this stuff.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm so glad that you made time. Thanks for, giving us a little bit of knowledge on all of these areas. And it's obvious that we can dive down deep in each one of these aspects with you and learn so much. And I appreciate you being willing to share some of this. your background and expertise in these areas. And I hope that we can have you back. I can have you back on the show. And
anytime.
Yeah, man, that'd be fun.
And I'm working on my outdoor kitchen. So, we're going to have an outdoor kitchen show where I can whip up some things. And I'll whip out some vegan and vegetarian on a grill too. I have no problem with that.
That's awesome. I'm going to pull this up for everybody to check out. guitarfoodie.com. That gives you links to all of his other sites, Tom's other sites, and gives you also the ability to purchase his delicious cookbook. And if you're not already following me, squadcar37.com is my website, youtube.com/squadcar37, and all the others at squadcar37.com. And Tom, looking forward to catching back up with you soon.
Take care, Jason.
All right, see ya.